I don't usually like to make videos on things that aren't really backed by some sort of substantial amount of fact. As a result of this, I've ended up with a stack of really out there topics that are super interesting and just wild to talk about, but I have not been able to put them in a regular video just because they're kind of too far out there. Needless to say, that is exactly what this video is going to be. I'm going to be covering some of these topics. I just didn't want to put them in my regular videos because I didn't want to seem insane, but these topics are nonetheless extremely interesting and or hilarious. So with all of that out of the way, the Montauk Project. The Montauk Project refers to a series of alleged secret experiments conducted by the United States government at Camp Hero, a former Air Force base in Montauk, New York, during the 70s and early 80s. Proponents claim it was an extension of earlier covert operations, building on the alleged Philadelphia experiment of 1943, which is a completely separate conspiracy theory. Basically, for those of you who don't know what this is, the Navy supposedly tested electromagnetic fields to make the USS Eldridge invisible to radar, only for the ship to teleport and cause horrific side effects like crew members fusing into the hull or suffering from madness. This whole thing began in the late 1980s when a Long Island man named Preston Nichols, who attended New Age and UFO conferences, started experiencing vivid dreams and deja vu revolving around Camp Hero. In 1989 through 1990, he began working with a hypnotist named John Ford, who was like the leader of a UFO group in Long Island, and under hypnosis, he apparently recovered memories of being a lead engineer on a secret project in Montauk. After this encounter, he became convinced that he had in fact actually been a lead engineer on this secret project, and he began to search for other people who were involved. He then located Duncan Cameron through similar fringe psychic circles in 1990, and after Cameron also underwent similar hypnosis sessions with Nichols, he suddenly also recalled being the project's primary psychic. Around the same time, a man named Al Bielek joined the group who claimed to have memories of working on the earlier 1940s Philadelphia experiment, except back then, apparently his name was Edward Cameron. After undergoing the same hypnosis as the others, Bielek then claimed to have located repressed memories of jumping from the 1940s as Edward and then appearing in 1983 in Montauk. This pattern of hysteria seems to have occurred to several other people as well, with the group slowly growing and each of them becoming convinced that they had some sort of a role in this Montauk Project. According to their repressed memories, the Montauk Air Force Station, which was officially decommissioned in 1969, purportedly remained active underground. This was said to have expanded into a sprawling facility with up to 12 subterranean levels, housing hundreds of workers and requiring tons of hidden supplies. The funding for this project allegedly came from $10 billion in recovered Nazi gold. The project reportedly aimed to weaponize the human mind and bend reality beyond comprehension. The claims from these people who were hypnotized and recovered their memories claim that there were mind control experiments where subjects who were often abducted homeless people or runaway children who were dubbed Montauk Boys were exposed to intense electromagnetic radiation to give them psychic abilities, induce hallucinations, or reprogram personalities through torture, starvation, LSD, and sensory deprivation.
These rooms held the chairs that the boys were programmed in. They also had many desks in them. This was essentially the heart of the programming.
I feel pain. I feel like a sense of helplessness, like there's no return. It's very emotional for me because I feel that, why did they give their life? What was the reason for this madness?
What madness would they have been caught up in?
What is this? And I just pray for the souls that were here.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I'm sorry.
Some of these people even claim to have recovered memories of gaining powers like telekinesis or remote viewing. Psychics like Duncan Cameron even claim that they were able to manifest thoughts into physical objects, spy on distant targets, or open portals to other dimensions. The handful of people who claim to have been involved say they were able to time travel, with some saying they were able to go back in time and meet Jesus, alter Civil War battles, and apparently interact with aliens in hyperspace. Al Bielek even claims that during the Philadelphia experiment in the 40s, while the ship was, quote, in hyperspace, he jumped off it and ended up in a hospital in the year 2137 for 6 weeks, and after that, he went to the year 2749, where he lived for 2 whole years, before ending up back in the 1970s, where he worked on the Montauk Project. There's actually a ton of archived presentations that these guys all gave about their experiences, and you can find many of them on YouTube. Al Bielek gave some of these presentations and tried to predict the future multiple times, but to save you some time, his predictions for the future haven't checked out so far. He claimed while he was in the future that he learned by the year 2025 that there would be a limited nuclear exchange or regional war involving the US, China, and Russia, and that there would be rapid increases in environmental catastrophes, including earthquakes, volcanic activity, and unusual weather, that governments worldwide would collapse, the military would take over, the global population would drop to 500 million people, and that rising sea levels would flood coastlines and reshape the surface of the Earth. Needless to say, none of that happened. Apparently, the experiments all came to an end on August 12th, 1983, when one of the psychics summoned a giant, hairy monster from his subconscious, and the monster went on a rampage, killed a bunch of people, and destroyed all of their equipment. Conveniently, the entire staff who worked on the project was either brainwashed, sworn to silence, or executed, and the basements where this was allegedly happening were filled in with concrete, and as a result, there's no way for anyone to verify that they actually happened. Also, apparently, this whole crazy fiasco was the inspiration for Stranger Things, and apparently one of the first working titles for the show was Montauk. I find that to be very interesting, and now thinking back to like the very beginning of the series, it actually kind of makes a lot of sense. Based on the fact that you clicked on this video, I'm going to assume you like watching stuff that keeps you up at night. The kind of stuff that leaves you staring up at the ceiling, tossing and turning. If this sounds anything like you, you are going to love today's sponsor, Mantis Sleep. Seriously, if you have sleep issues or insomnia of any kind, this is an ad you're going to want to watch all the way through because this one personally has changed my life. Mantis Sleep actually sponsored the channel around a year ago when they sent me this mask, the Mantis Sleep Pro mask. Back then, I was really struggling with insomnia, but one of the main things that truly helped get me out of that was this sleep mask. I never used to like sleep masks because I hated the way that these flat ones would always press up against your eyes. It made it actually harder to sleep. However, Mantis Sleep has completely solved this problem through this design where they have these eye cups on the mask and they don't ever actually touch your eyes. They comfortably encase you in total darkness so effectively, even if you open them inside the mask. The Pro Mask has done wonders for my sleep, and this new Silk Mask that they sent me is actually one of my new favorites. On top of the Pro and Silk Mask, they also have a cooling mask, a weighted mask, and even a sound sleep mask so you can play white noise and basically be in a portable sensory deprivation chamber. They also sent over this amazing white noise machine. I've never seen anything like this before, but it's designed to block city noise and neighboring voices with a sound shield before it can even reach your ears, and I've been testing it out for a couple weeks now, and it really does seem to work. On top of all of this, I've been told that there's going to be a flash sale from December 5th through 7th where there's going to be 20% off the Pro Mask and the first generation sound mask. This is a great window to get a great product at a great price for someone you love this holiday season. If you're struggling with poor sleep or fatigue, be sure to click the link in the description and use code FORTUNE to get 10% off your order. Deep Bush family conspiracy theories. I'm jumbling a few conspiracies together for this next entry because there are just so many wild theories surrounding the Bush family. The first is referred to as the Scherf conspiracy, and it involves the idea that George H.W. Bush wasn't born in Massachusetts in 1924 as the son of Prescott and Dorothy Bush, but was actually originally named George Scherf Jr., a German-born teenager sent to America as a spy for the Nazis in the 1930s. According to the legend, George H.W. Bush, or Scherf Jr., was the son of George Scherf Sr., who supposedly worked as an assistant to inventor Nikola Tesla in New York. George Scherf was, in fact, a real person who served as Nikola Tesla's longtime accountant, secretary, and trusted business associate from at least the late 1890s until around 1930. This younger Scherf allegedly stole secrets from Tesla's experiments and even participated in his murder in 1943 by suffocation, all apparently on orders from Adolf Hitler himself to funnel his inventions back to the Nazis. It's said that Prescott Bush, a prominent banker, adopted the boy, forged documents to hide his identity, and integrated him into the family to infiltrate U.S. power structures. The conspiracy states that Otto Skorzeny, an SS officer known as Hitler's favorite commando for his elite, high-risk missions behind enemy lines, orchestrated the entire operation. The theory originated from a man named Eric Berman, who in the early 2000s claimed he dated Skorzeny's daughter and received a 1999 deathbed confession from Skorzeny himself, who apparently faked his death, which is officially reported to have taken place back in 1975. Of course, the CIA apparently helped him to fake this death and allowed him to live secretly in the US until dying for real on December 31st, 1999 in Florida. Berman's claims are complete with photos apparently showing Bush with Nazi leaders. He published this information in his book, The Bush Connection, and on his website, thebushconnection.com. This website is still up and running, and it looks exactly how you'd expect it to look. Now, as crazy as this one is, it seems like the conspiracy is probably stemming from the handful of factual roots of documented business dealings between Prescott Bush, or George H.W. Bush's dad, and Nazi-linked entities between the 1930s and 1940s. Prescott was a director at Brown Brothers Harriman, a firm that managed U.S. interests for Fritz Thyssen, which was a German steel tycoon who funded Hitler's rise until separating from him in 1939. He had another connection to the Consolidated Silesian Steel Company, whose facilities in Nazi-occupied Poland used slave labor from Auschwitz during the war. If you dig into this a little bit more, though, you'll see why historians claim that there really isn't any evidence of him actually sympathizing with Nazis. It seems like he was more so just being a pragmatic businessman, and he wasn't really aware of or in control of these connections to the Nazis. Still, though, his critics argue he was aware of what was going on and that his actions bordered on aiding the enemy. There are a handful of really crazy pictures floating around regarding this theory, but at the end of the day, again, it kind of all centers around Eric Berman's allegations, and essentially all other historical fact debunks it, so this one probably doesn't hold too much weight. With all of that being said, though, the other two facts I want to touch on regarding the Bush family are actually entirely based on fact. This part of the entry really is going to center around whether you think what I'm about to talk about was all just a coincidence or whether something deeper was going on. Back in the late 1970s, after a young George W. Bush failed in a run for Congress, he founded a small oil company called Arbusto Energy in Midland, Texas, named after the Spanish word for bush. Obviously, Arbusto needed investors to get off the ground, and one of those early backers was a Houston businessman named James R. Bath. In 1979, Bath invested $50,000 into Arbusto. However, what makes this investment interesting is the fact that Bath was, at the time, the U.S. business representative for Salem bin Laden, the older half-brother of Osama bin Laden and head of the wealthy Saudi bin Laden family's international interests after their father's death. Salem, who ran the family's massive construction empire, had appointed Bath to handle investments in Texas real estate, aviation, and other ventures. Multiple accounts from the era, including court depositions and journalistic investigations, indicate that the $50,000 Bath invested in Bush's company came from funds tied to Salem bin Laden. Bush has stated that he was unaware of any Saudi money behind Bath's stake, and Bath himself denied it was directly on behalf of the bin Ladens, but the paper trail and timing have kept questions alive for decades. Even more wild, this is not the only connection between the Bush family and the bin Laden family pre-9/11. Fast forward to the 1990s and early 2000s. With his son now in office, former President George H.W. Bush joined the Carlyle Group, a powerful Washington-based private equity firm specializing in defense and aerospace buyouts. He came on as a senior advisor in 1993, traveling the world to attract investors, including multiple trips to Saudi Arabia. Among Carlyle's limited partners at the time was, again, the bin Laden family. They invested at least $2 million into one of its funds. On September 10th and 11th of 2001, Carlyle was holding its annual investor conference at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Washington, D.C. Attending as a representative of the family's interests was Shafiq bin Laden, one of Osama's half-brothers. George H.W. Bush had also been in attendance at this meeting on the 10th of September 2001. To be clear here, the bin Laden family did disown Osama in 1994 after his increasingly radical statements. With that in mind, is this just another crazy coincidence? A happenstance intersection between two elite circles? I'll leave that to you to decide. Sigils and microchips. This one is absolutely one of those schizo ones, but these super disturbing posts talking about it keep popping up in my feed, like right before I go to bed every night, and it always scares the hell out of me, so I'm throwing it in here. To begin, I'm sure many of you might recall the Lesser Key of Solomon, which I discussed a while back in an early episode of the Forbidden Knowledge Iceberg. The Lesser Key of Solomon is a 17th century grimoire which purportedly contains rituals for summoning spirits and a collection of 72 sigils, each representing a different demon. These symbols are believed in occult circles to be seals that allow practitioners to evoke, control, bind, and compel these entities to perform tasks. This theory suggests that when viewed under magnification, these sigils are visible in the pathways on silicone microchips where gold or copper lines form patterns to route electrical signals. Summed up, the claim posits that demons are bound within microchips and that their power is harnessed in order to perform high-level tasks. As a result, these demons are allegedly imprisoned within the silicone and are forced to execute computational processes as a form of eternal servitude. According to ancient legend from the Testament of Solomon, the biblical King Solomon receives a magical ring from the Archangel Michael, ingrained with what is now known as the Seal of Solomon, which gave him absolute power to summon, interrogate, and bind demons. In the legend, a demon named Orneus torments one of Solomon's workers, and as a result, Solomon uses the ring and forces Orneus to bring the prince of demons, Beelzebul, followed by dozens more, before forcing them to help to build the first temple, though in the Testament of Solomon, one demon seems to imply that this control is only temporary and will loosen in the future when he states, quote, "Thy tyranny over us is short, and then we shall again have free range over mankind, so that they shall revere us as if we were gods." In the modern conspiracy version of the story, the demons are unable to show themselves or speak to humans openly, so instead they manifest through our technology, influencing mankind through social media, the internet, and addiction to our phones. Lyme disease lab leak theory. This theory claims that the modern explosion of Lyme disease, the tick-borne illness causing rash, fever, joint pain, fatigue, and potentially even long-term neurological problems, stemmed from secret U.S. military experiments in the 50s and 60s. Allegedly implicated is the Plum Island Animal Disease Center. This is a high-security United States federal research facility sitting off the coast of Long Island, New York. It sits just miles from the outbreak epicenter in Lyme, Connecticut. Also potentially implicated might have been Rocky Mountain Laboratories in Montana. The theory has been popularized through science writer Chris Newby's 2019 book, Bitten: The Secret History of Lyme Disease and Biological Weapons, as well as from interviews with researcher Willy Bergdorfer, the Swiss-American scientist who officially discovered the Lyme disease-causing bacterium Borrelia burgdorferi in 1982. In interviews as well as lab notes revealed following his death, Bergdorfer apparently admitted to working on bioweapons programs at Fort Detrick and Rocky Mountain Laboratories, where he experimented with mutating bacteria through cocktails of viruses and irradiation to make them more harmful. He even researched tick-borne and other vector-borne pathogens, some of which were investigated for their potential use in biological warfare. The aim was apparently to develop incapacitating weapons that could stealthily weaken enemy forces through illness rather than killing them outright. The goal would be for the operation to potentially go undetected. Given the fact that the high-security Federal Animal Research Lab on Plum Island literally sits just a few miles south of Lyme, Connecticut, where the first large outbreak of Lyme disease occurred, leading to its discovery, you've got to wonder if there's a connection. There is credible reporting that Plum Island Animal Disease Center maintained tick colonies and performed some vector-related research over the decades. Multiple sources note that hard and soft ticks were kept or bred for experiments involving animal pathogens. However, the Plum Island lab denies that they ever studied Lyme disease. Instead, they point out that archived specimens reveal that Lyme disease was present in the area before the outbreak. Science says that the explosion of Lyme disease cases in the 70s occurred due to the disease spreading more widely throughout the tick population. According to modern science, this, along with other ecological factors, has led to the modern explosion of Lyme disease that we see today. Still, others point to declassified documents showing the Pentagon's biological weapons program in the 1950s and 60s, which included weaponizing arthropods like ticks and fleas to deliver agents like Q fever, typhus, and rabies. And these proponents claim that it isn't hard to imagine a cover-up to avoid accountability if a leak were to have occurred. There would have been serious international consequences for having continued to experiment with biological weapons following the international signing of the United Nations Biological Weapons Convention in 1972. If the US was caught still experimenting with these kinds of weapons, it would have been very bad. Some insist that the proximity between Plum Island and Lyme, Connecticut is hard to dismiss. Others say that it's just correlation and that no hard evidence exists connecting Lyme disease to a lab leak in 1975. I've spent so much time researching this single entry, and I'm still, honestly, very confused by these different connections. In my opinion, I'm just going to conclude with the fact that I wouldn't put it past the US to have been implicated in this, but for now, unless documents are declassified or a whistleblower comes out bringing evidence to the table, I'm going to have to side with the skeptics and say I don't think there's enough evidence to actually connect Plum Island with the outbreak of Lyme disease. DUMBs. DUMBs, or Deep Underground Military Bases, are a series of allegedly massive secret underground bases buried far beneath the Earth's surface and operated by the United States military. These are said to serve as hubs for operations ranging from military command centers to sites of extraterrestrial collaboration or even human experimentation. The core of the conspiracy likely stems from real, documented underground structures built during the Cold War for strategic defense, such as the Cheyenne Mountain Complex in Colorado, which was home to NORAD during the Cold War. It's designed to withstand nuclear blasts with massive granite shielding and self-sustaining systems for air, water, and power. Similar facilities such as Raven Rock in Pennsylvania and Mount Weather in Virginia have also been publicly acknowledged by the U.S. government as bunkers equipped to shelter high-ranking officials during catastrophic events, complete with command rooms, living quarters, and communication networks that could operate independently for extended periods. However, the conspiracy theory here proposes that the government has expanded this operation to hundreds or even thousands of sites nationwide. On top of that, apparently they're all interconnected by a series of magnetic levitation tunnels so that they can transport whoever and whatever they want across continents and even under oceans without detection. It's alleged that these bases are funded through black budgets or the trillions of dollars that has mysteriously gone missing from government accounts, apparently due to accounting failures. We've discussed this aspect before, namely the trillions of dollars that the Pentagon has misplaced over the years. Former Bush administration official Catherine Austin Fitts has cited this as evidence of massive covert spending on underground infrastructure. Construction is said to involve advanced tunnel boring machines, some of them being nuclear-powered, capable of drilling miles per day while melting rock into smooth, glass-like walls to create stable passages without traditional excavation debris. This conveniently would explain the lack of displaced soil on the surface. One of the most infamous DUMBs is the alleged Dulce Base in New Mexico, which has been described as a multi-level complex extending over 2 miles down into the ground. It was first described by a man named Phil Schneider in the 1990s. He was a geologist and engineer supposedly involved in building over a dozen of these bases, who claimed to have encountered hostile extraterrestrials during a 1979 expansion project, leading to a violent firefight that killed dozens of humans and aliens alike. He claims Dulce Base housed joint human-alien operations focused on genetic hybridization, mind control, and advanced weaponry. He was found dead in Oregon in 1996, supposedly by ligature strangulation using a catheter tube. Believers in the conspiracy consider his death to have been extremely suspicious, as he had to tie multiple tight knots on his own, all while having severe disabilities which would have made this difficult for him to achieve in the first place. They also point to the fact that he warned that he was being targeted for assassination. His ex-wife claims that numerous documents and samples from his home were missing by the time others arrived at the scene, such as photographs of the bases detailing underground construction sites, tunneling machines, and unusual geological formations. Also allegedly missing were hand-drawn diagrams of underground base layouts, metal samples he claimed were exotic alloys, alien materials, or examples of classified metallurgy used in construction. Some similar proposals have been shown in actual government documents, such as in the 1960s, this proposal for DUC, or Deep Underground Command Center. This was brought to President John F. Kennedy shortly before his assassination, and it was described as, quote, a very deep underground center close to the Pentagon, perhaps 3,000 to 4,000 feet down, protected to withstand direct hits by high-yield weapons and endure about 30 days in a post-attack period. Apparently, it would have been capable of surviving multiple direct blasts of 200 to 300 megaton surface-bursting nuclear weapons, but officially it was never built. Project Bluebeam. This one isn't exactly as obscure as the others, but I've been wanting to cover it for a long time, and I haven't had a really good opportunity to do so. Project Bluebeam is one of the most elaborate conspiracy theories to emerge from the 1990s, stemming from a Canadian man named Serge Monast. He began dispersing the theory in 1994, claiming that NASA, working in conjunction with the United Nations and global elites, has developed an extremely intricate technological scheme to implement a totalitarian one-world government and New Age religion by orchestrating a massive, coordinated deception across the entire planet. The theory claims that this grand illusion will culminate in a technologically simulated second coming of Christ designed to dismantle all traditional religions and replace them with a unified global belief system centered on what Monast termed the Antichrist in accordance with Scripture. The conspiracy alleges that the establishment of this universal religion is essential for an ideological foundation behind a New World Order dictatorship. Monast's theory outlines 4 distinct phases through which this alleged plan would unfold. The first step claims that artificial seismic events would be triggered at strategically selected archaeological sites worldwide. These would be used to uncover falsified ancient artifacts and other discoveries that would contradict and delegitimize established religious beliefs. According to Monast, these discoveries would be presented as evidence that these beliefs have been misunderstood and misinterpreted throughout history, delegitimizing the religions of billions of people and psychologically preparing them to accept a new model. Once this process is completed, the second step involves the projection of three-dimensional holographic images into the atmosphere using satellite technology as well as ground-based systems. These holograms would apparently display different religious figures like Jesus, Buddha, Muhammad, and others, before all of them merge together into a single deity, which again, Monast defines as the Antichrist. The third phase centers on telepathic electronic communication, in which radio waves at extremely low frequencies supposedly reach the human brain directly, creating the illusion that a deity is communicating directly to their consciousness. This reminds me of the V2K weapons, which we discussed in an earlier video, except that actually seems to have had some backing in the military. I'm not presenting that as actual evidence of Project Bluebeam, just an interesting parallel. Monast predicts that this technology would circumvent any human awareness, thereby implanting thoughts that victims would perceive as their own original ideas or as the actual communications from the deities. The fourth and final step concerns what he calls universal supernatural manifestations via electronics. This apparently would involve staged alien invasions, a simulated rapture, and other mind-bending supernatural phenomena designed to produce mass hysteria, resulting in global acceptance of authoritarian control. He's made claims regarding the High-Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, or HAARP, the controversial ionospheric research facility in Alaska, attributing its real purpose to weather modification and holographic projection capabilities far beyond what's been documented. Project Bluebeam has experienced periodic resurgences, particularly in recent years following unexplained phenomena like the mysterious drone sightings across New Jersey and other states in December 2024. Some suggested that these events were a sign of either testing of the holographic systems or of their imminent implementation. If nothing else, the story of Project Bluebeam has been a warning about how humanity could suffer a mass deception as a result of these new emerging technologies. Things like drone constellations, artificial intelligence, or holographic projections each present threats in this way. No rovers on Mars. This one's pretty self-explanatory. It's the theory that there are no rovers on Mars. It's gained traction in the early 2000s, fueled by side-by-side comparisons of Martian photographs with landscapes on Earth, which appear very similar. Many point to structures and images taken from the Curiosity or Perseverance rovers that allegedly resemble those in remote areas of Devon Island in Canada, which is the largest uninhabited island in the world and also happens to be where NASA tests their rover prototypes. People have also compared these images to deserts in Morocco or to abandoned mining sites in Chile, claiming that the lighting, shadows, and terrain match too closely to be a coincidence. It's claimed that these photos are taken in restricted military zones or on protected sets, and that the colors are then digitally altered to match the surface of Mars. Others claim to even be able to see animals visible in the photos, like lizards, rats, and even an iguana, but NASA says these are just rocks. U.S. deployment of biological weapons in the Korean War. This one has some pretty serious historical backing, and honestly, it might have actually happened because to this day, historians are still divided. In February of 1952, Chinese, Soviet, and North Korean officials claimed that American forces were systematically dropping insects and contaminated materials across North Korea and northeastern China to spread diseases including plague, cholera, and typhoid. The United States denied these allegations, referring to them as a propaganda operation. However, this blanket denial misrepresents a far more complicated reality. The allegations actually gain some credibility through significant historical context. I know most of you are already well aware of this by now, but I need to go over it anyway for background. Unit 731, the secret Japanese biological warfare research facility, conducted horrific experiments on prisoners and civilians during World War II, killing potentially hundreds of thousands of people. After the war, the United States government granted numerous Japanese Unit 731 researchers and leaders immunity from war crimes prosecution in exchange for their expertise and research files. Much like Operation Paperclip, they were then absorbed into the American Biological Weapons Program. This much, at least, is well documented in history and meant that the American forces were all but confirmed to have had the technical capability and knowledge to wage biological warfare in the Korean War. The allegations also gained traction on the testimony of captured American pilots. Between 1951 and 1953, 38 American servicemen, including high-ranking Colonel Frank Schwabel, signed confessions stating that they had participated in biological warfare missions. Schwabel, who was the Chief of Staff of the United States 1st Marine Aircraft Wing, provided detailed testimony to the North Koreans and Chinese, describing the dropping of plague-infected rodents and cholera-laden insects. However, obviously these confessions occurred while under North Korean and Chinese captivity, and U.S. military officials say that they were forced into signing these confessions under torture. This is supported by the fact that upon repatriation, all of their confessions were retracted. Despite this, some researchers, including clinical psychologist Jeffrey Kay, have argued that the confessions contain internal consistency and mutual corroboration that torture alone doesn't seem to explain, suggesting that they may reflect actual operations, at least in part, and that the retractions were necessary if they were indeed covering up United States war crimes. Commander of the United Nations General Mark W. Clark denounced the biological warfare accusations China was making against these captive men. He stated, quote, "Whether these statements ever passed the lips of these unfortunate men is doubtful. If they did, however, too familiar are the mind-annihilating methods of these communists in extorting whatever words they want. The men themselves are not to blame, and they have my deepest sympathy for having been used in this abominable way." The International Red Cross and the WHO eventually ruled out biological warfare, leading to backlash from the Chinese government, who claimed that they were being manipulated by the United States to cover up their illegal deployment of biological weapons. As a result, China arranged for an investigation through the Soviet-affiliated World Peace Council, who created the International Scientific Commission for the Facts Concerning Bacterial Warfare in China and Korea, or ISC for short. This commission actually consisted of many different accredited scientists and doctors from all over the world, including from France, Italy, Sweden, Brazil, and the Soviet Union, including the renowned British biochemist and sinologist Joseph Needham, who was elected a Fellow of the Royal Society, Fellow of the British Academy, as well as the Order of the Champions of Honor by Queen Elizabeth II. He was the only living person at the time to hold all three of these highly prestigious titles. With all that being said, the International Scientific Commission visited Korea and China as part of their investigation, with evidence including dozens of eyewitnesses, testimonies from doctors, medical samples from the deceased, bomb casings, as well as 4 American Korean War prisoners who confirmed the U.S. use of biological warfare. They drafted a 665-page report investigating these claims, identifying dozens of eyewitnesses and medical samples, apparently showing exposure to pathogens. This photograph from the report allegedly shows a bomb casing traditionally used by the United States for dispersing propaganda leaflets over enemy territory. Chinese forces claim that these bombs were repurposed for dropping biological agents over population centers. Things like swarms of infected fleas or nerve agents. On the 15th of September 1952, the final report was signed, concluding that the U.S. had indeed deployed biological weapons in Korea. Yet, in 1998, supposed Soviet archival documents surfaced through Japanese media channels allegedly revealing that the entire campaign was an elaborate disinformation scheme operated by Stalin, Mao, and Kim Il-sung. These documents claimed that the communists deliberately infected criminals with plague to create false evidence for the International Scientific Commission. However, other scholars have questioned the authenticity of these Soviet documents, pointing out missing seals and signatures, and arguing that the documents contradict themselves at several points. Because of all this noise, it's kind of difficult to actually get to the bottom of this, and as a result, it has never been definitively confirmed or denied that the United States actually deployed biological weapons during the war. Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars. Silent Weapons for Quiet Wars is a mysterious 44-page manual dated May 1979, which appears to be a top-secret document that outlines a covert quiet war declared in 1954 by an international elite against the general public. The document first surfaced publicly in the mid-1980s, with the most common story claiming that it was discovered by accident in July of 1986. According to this account, a Boeing aircraft employee bought an IBM copier at a government auction from McChord Air Force Base near Tacoma, Washington, and once he got home and opened it up, he found the manual inside. The document discusses society as an electrical circuit and its citizens as harvestable energy. It describes a process by which the economy can be deliberately subjected to repeated shock through inflation, wage freezes, credit changes, and interest rate hikes, so the public stays in perpetual imbalance and recovery, too busy surviving to effectively resist the elite. In the document, diversion is described as key, with sports, trivial entertainment, gambling, and alcohol being implemented to drain any energy that could fuel rebellion. Traditional family units are to be destroyed by forcing both parents to work and children into daycare from infancy. In this way, the state can become an irreplaceable authority which the people will come to depend on for their own survival. Education is to be transformed into meaningless busy work that produces obedient, technically trained, but intellectually sterile workers. Food, drugs, fluoride, sugar, pharmaceuticals, and recreational substances are to be weaponized to reduce physical and mental vitality. Ultimate surveillance of individual personal lives is to be collected, enabling preemptive neutralization of threats. Traditional religion and absolute morality are undermined so that the state is left as the ultimate authority to appeal to. All the while, those responsible remain invisible, in the background, and unaccountable. This document describes how to use social and economic engineering as a tool for power. It presents tactics which can be used to destroy the lower class through poor education, the dissolution of the family, or orchestrated chaos, all while maintaining the invisibility of those at the reins. It describes a system where citizens are deceived into fighting against each other instead of attacking those with real power. Many point to quotations from within the actual document which seem to have predicted the world we live in today. Quote, "Experience has proven that the simplest method of securing a silent weapon and gaining control of the public is to keep the public undisciplined and ignorant of the system's basic principles on one hand, while keeping them confused, disorganized, and distracted with matters of no real importance on the other." This quote then goes on to explain how this is achieved by disengaging the mind and increasing people's self-indulgence through a constant barrage of sex, violence, and war in the media and, quote, "giving them what they desire in excess, junk food for thought, and depriving them of what they really need." That being said, although the document is quite intriguing and does seem to have predicted many aspects of the modern world with some notable accuracy, it's been deemed a hoax by most scholars and journalists who have reviewed it, as no public verifiable evidence or confirmation from anywhere else has been able to link it to any official parties. Correlation doesn't equal causation, and the fact that the manual doesn't even name an author or even the agency or institution it is affiliated with leads me to personally conclude that it's a hoax. A man by the name of Lyle Hartford Van Dyke Jr. would come out many years later, claiming to have been the actual author of the document. He said that he distributed a handful of these himself many years back when he wrote it, and then just kind of forgot about it. It's not really clear exactly who he would have distributed this document to, or why he would have created it in the first place. According to him, it's possible that one of these documents ended up in that copier, and then from there, after its rediscovery, it was spread much more widely. Then again, very little information is actually available on this person, and he was never able to actually verify definitively that he wrote that document, so it's kind of unclear exactly where it did come from. Bill Gates' farmland and food industry influence. Bill Gates, the co-founder of Microsoft and one of the world's richest men, has found himself at the center of numerous conspiracy theories in recent years, with many surrounding his massive farmland purchases. Since 2013, Gates and his investment vehicle Cascade Investment have quietly acquired something like 275,000 acres of farmland across 19 American states, making Bill Gates the largest private owner of farmland in the United States. The most common claim is that Bill Gates is systematically buying up the majority of American farmland as part of a plot to manipulate the nation's food supply. The theory suggests that by consolidating farmland ownership, Gates, in collusion with other elite figures, can dictate what Americans eat, potentially forcing the population into eating more artificial, processed, genetically modified, and even lab-grown foods. He's dumped lots of money into artificial lab-made food companies, such as his investment of at least $50 million into Impossible Foods. The fears stem from the fact that investments like these, coming from billionaires with massively consolidated influence, will begin to shape global food systems around centralized, high-tech artificial food production, rather than by shifting our focus towards what most people actually want, which is healthy, natural foods that aren't hyper-processed or genetically modified or heavily synthetic. While Gates claims these moves are attempts to address climate and food sustainability issues, the vast majority of people don't want to be eating this artificial slop. Bill Gates, through the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, has also funded bug-related food projects, including a $100,000 grant in 2012 to All Things Bugs, LLC, for developing insect-based foods, and over $2.2 million in 2021 to Insectipro in Kenya for using black soldier fly larvae for human and animal consumption. Maybe it just sounds gross and it really is a good solution, but I don't know. What actual civilians who rely on the systems Gates is messing around with actually want to eat lab-grown meat? Even vegetarians and vegans, in large part, don't want to pretend to eat natural meat. They want all-natural fruits, vegetables, or nuts. Maybe even a veggie burger, but not some synthetic, processed abomination. So again, the conspiracy part really comes from his intentions and from people theorizing that they're not so good or are part of a larger population control plot. Intentional calcification of the pineal gland. This one is definitely a little more widely known than the others, but I never really dove exactly into the weeds behind the theory, so I wanted to dig into it a bit more. This theory insists that powerful entities intertwined with the government and a shadowy elite are deliberately introducing chemicals like fluoride into public water supplies to harden the pineal gland. Supposedly, the reason behind doing this is that it would impair human cognition, emotional resilience, or even our spiritual potential. The pineal gland is a pea-sized endocrine organ which sits deep in the brain. It's responsible for producing melatonin, which is obviously essential for maintaining sleep patterns, circadian rhythm, and hormonal balance. More relevant to the theory, however, is the fact that in many ancient or mystic traditions, the pineal gland is believed to be a bridge between the physical and spiritual worlds, and sort of a central organ in human consciousness. This is most explicit in Hinduism and Buddhism through the Ajna chakra, or the third eye, which is located at the brow and described in Vedic and Tantric texts as the seat of intuition, higher consciousness, and enlightenment. Many have also drawn parallels to the appearance of the Eye of Horus, saying that it mirrors the look of the gland. With this background, it's argued that fluoride, a mineral added to water allegedly for dental health since the mid-20th century, accumulates disproportionately in the pineal gland compared to other body parts. Research from the 1990s by British scientist Jennifer Luke revealed that in autopsied human brains, fluoride levels correlated strongly with calcium deposits, which formed hard, stone-like phosphate crystals that encase the gland. Believers take this farther and assert that this is stifling higher brain function in humans and that this is being done on purpose in order to prevent us from either reaching our spiritual or mental potential. They claim it exacerbates health issues such as earlier puberty in children, lowered IQ scores in populations with high fluoride intake, and increased susceptibility to neurodegenerative conditions. With this in mind, those who believe in the theory argue that the gland is vulnerable due to the fact that it actually sits outside the blood-brain barrier, making it a prime target for engineering. Apparently, fluoride-fed rats exhibit diminished melatonin output and brain inflammation, while human data from regions with elevated water fluoride link it to cognitive deficits and sleep disturbances. Modern science asserts that the pineal gland's primary function is just melatonin production, and that at most, calcification of the gland results in sleep disturbances, but doesn't seem to point to it as an essential region for the processes behind consciousness or higher-level brain function. Again, though, of course, this is disputed.